Hey, what's up guys? Shadow Steel here. Welcome back to Railworks Sundays. And in celebration of the announcement of New York Central number 3001 being returned to service, we're going to continue on with our journey with the New York Central 999. We're going to be taking her on our run. On the second half of our journey, the second part of our journey. It's still the first half of the leg. But we're going to be going about 20 miles, a good 40 miles at this point, right? From here, yeah, about 40 miles. We'll be going about 40 miles on this run, but it shouldn't take us too long if we're going at track speed. Let's get her moving. Alright, we should be good. Drop the reverser. Drop it. On a 50 mile an hour limit. And we'll drop it down to about 20 on the reverser there. And go. So yeah, last time we ran this locomotive, I want to say it was back in June or something. It's pretty long ago, honestly. But New York Central is back in the news again, preservation-wise anyway, with the, like I said, the Fort Wayne Historical Society announcing that New York Central number 3001, a Mohawk class of locomotive, will be returned to service. That's going to be interesting, to say the least. Because it's not only just that locomotive that they're restoring. They're also restoring a small set of passenger cars from New York Central. Just going to have a matching set of passenger cars. Which is really going to be cool, honestly, because we don't really have much in the way of New York Central equipment that is in preservation that we can actually run. So it's really cool to see just a whole bunch of New York Central equipment being brought back to life. And they even say in this announcement video that it's like there's not much of a presence in the world of preservation with the New York Central. We have 3 steam locomotives total in terms of standard gauge. Maybe a couple of diesels in preservation as well, and maybe a handful of cars. But like the active, the steam locomotive roster, for example, that is 3 standard gauge locomotives. And because the New York Central didn't really have narrow gauge, we can't really count that. So yeah, it was one of those things where you actually look, keep in mind that the Denver and Rio Grande Western has a total of the number of operating K-37s, for example, to put this in perspective. The number of K-37s that were preserved and the number that are that are operational, 3 of them, mind you, is the same exact number that in terms of all of the New York Central standard gauge steam in preservation. There is literally only 3 New York Central steam locomotives still around. Now, granted, if you want to compare it to the Denver Rio Grande Western standard gauge equipment, there's only 1 Denver and Rio Grande Western narrow gauge steam locomotive still in preservation. Ironically, still in the place, in Golden, Colorado, where 491, a K-37, operates. So, got a couple of interesting little things here. And keep our speed up here. We're just, like I said, we're going to be racing down the track here. Quite a ways, honestly. So we got about a 40-mile journey here. About 2 miles out from that block here. I just want to go via. We'll have a passenger stop in the next station here. Oop, keep it moving. But yeah, the machine rails 999. Technically, this is a New York Central and Hudson River Railroad locomotive, but that railroad eventually became the New York Central. They dropped the Hudson River Railroad part of it and just became the New York Central. Interestingly enough, the Empire State Express, I think I mentioned this in the last video, the original was kind of a special service for, whoops, oh well. How did they put a car there? Huh, funny. The original service, is that double yellows? Okay. The original service was for the Columbian Expedition, and this locomotive was noted, and now it's not been confirmed or anything, but it was noted to travel at 112 miles an hour between Buffalo and Albany, I think it was. There was a straight section of track somewhere where it was pretty level and it just opened her wide open to see how fast it could go. It was modified for it even. This is the modified variant because there's actually some equipment. Her wheels are actually larger than the actual standard wheelbase. The drive wheels anyway. So that was one of those things where like they it was like a heavily modified variant of the locomotive. Is that the station or whistle blower there? That's a does that say yard limit? No, that's a trespassing sign. Okay. But yeah, it was one of those things where the locomotive, the original service was not really a long-term service, I don't think, from the Hudson River Railroad, the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad, which later, of course, became the New York Central. Because the one that many people know about today, the Empire State Express, came about later on as part of the stainless steel fleet, which, ironically, many of those cars that are being restored by the Fort Wayne Historical Society are proudly from, because they're stainless steel Bud cars. And that was kind of where Bud got famous, was their stainless steel cars. And the Empire State Express, when it was reintroduced in 1941, was famous for the use of their Hudson class locomotives, the J3As in particular. One of which was some of them were streamlined in this beautiful stainless steel on top and then black on bottom. It was just an absolutely gorgeous design. Probably one of my favorites. Now you also have the other Hudsons that were designed in the more 20th Century Limited Art Deco style, and that's kind of the Hudson people remember. That's kind of the design of the Hudsons people remember, is that Art Deco style of the J3As. It's a kind of a bullet nose with that kind of blade on the front. And if you look up the New York Central Hudson or the 20th Century Limited, you'll probably see that particular version of the Hudson. And with the we're coming up to 50 here. We're gonna have to slow down here. And with, naturally, the New York Central, the Empire State Express being introduced on December 7th, 1941, granted, it could not pick a worse time to be reintroduced as a service. Because you have to keep in mind that shortly after that introduction, or the day that train was introduced, was the day Pearl Harbor was bombed. So we basically introduced the train right as we were going into World War II. But it was still at a time where we weren't really worried about it too much. We're coming up to a 65 coming up after that. Okay. We'll be reopening up our throttle later. But yeah, it was one of those situations where the railroad basically took, it was a name that became synonymous with the 20th century, with the railroad doesn't have a lot left in terms of its preservation heritage. And seeing that 3001 is going to be restored back to operation, and not only that, but supposedly run over home rails. Because the Fort Wayne Historical Society has basically, I think, acquired some trackage of just old New York Central trackage, which is, again, really fucking cool. It's really nice to see that they've got basically everything they need to operate this Mohawk. They've already operated the 765 over that same trackage too, which is really cool. And there's other places that would be more than willing to have that giant 482 operating over their over their rails, because you have to keep in mind, this is these locomotives, the 3001, it's the end of the steam era. It was built in 1940, and it's considered to be kind of the most advanced locomotives in the United, kind of state-of-the-art type locomotive, because they were, by the 1940s, we kind of understood what we could do with a steam locomotive to get the most power out of it. And it's kind of crazy to think that now we're just it's one of those things where we are. It's really cool to see a lot of these obscure railroad locomotives being restored and back on the main. I mean, I didn't get the 20 seconds, but that's fine. Not only is 3001 being restored, but they announced a couple years ago that the Pennsylvania Railroad 1361 was going to be back in operation. They actually got pretty far along with that particular locomotive restoration recently. because the whole tenders back in that, most of the tenders like back in, like really, it's just like they got the tender back. Like the tender is back in shape, and you can go on to the Spirit of, and then you can look at the tender on Facebook and everything. And then you have locomotives like, or rather railroads like the East Broad Top that are being brought back to life after years of dormancy. Because that's another thing, like many, like a lot of it, we're kind of like, there was this early golden age, like back in the 80s and 90s, there was this golden age of preservation, I would say, in terms of seeing things operate and run again. Because starting in the early 80s, you saw a lot of homegrown steam restoration outfits pop up. That's kind of where the Frisco 1522 came about. The St. Louis Steam Trend Association formed in 1985 and restored the 1522 in 1988. And then you've got the Cotton Belt, like the Cotton Belt 819, which was also restored in the 80s. Served for quite a few years before it was retired. Ironically, shortly after the 80s, like mid-90s, I believe it is. Oh, shit. But it was one of those things where it's like, there was quite a few of those small preservation groups that were basically, getting back to their, like getting locomotives that were so obscure but had kind of a strong following. You had the Norfolk Southern back in the 90s, 80s and 90s. That was their goal. Like 80s and 90s for the Norfolk Southern Steam program was really the golden age of that program. Because you had like 3 different locomotives at one time, all on the program that were all operating roughly around the same time. You typically either saw 4501, Southern 4501, Norfolk and Western 611, or Norfolk and Western 1218. And occasionally you would get the other power, like the Nickel Plate 587, operating alongside them, or the Louisville and Asheville number 152, back and operate, like side by side. But it was typically those 3 bigger locomotives that you saw with the Norfolk Southern Steam program. And then of course you had the Union Pacific, which they still have a big steam program going around to this day. As you all know, number 4014 was restored was announced to be restored back in 2015 and returned to service in 2019. But in terms of like the amount of the equipment that has since come back to life over the years. I mean, again, you're looking at locomotives like Reading 2102. She had not seen her boiler had not been like she had not turned a wheel for quite some time. I think the latest footage I could find of her on YouTube is from the 90s, like early 90s. I think 91 in particular. And her sister 2100 is also being restored back to operation. Now, granted, the latest footage of her operating was 2002, which was about the same time that 1522 was operating as well. And unfortunately, the horror stories I would say about 2100 and her operations over in Washington, the state of Washington, dear God. If you want to know how not to operate a locomotive or operate a steam program, look at that program. The poor thing was in such bad shape that when they got her in, like, I want to say in 2018 or so, she was so bad that they were originally going to keep running her off, like they were going to reconvert her back to coal. And they found, like, just so many problems with her, like, everything. Like, if you actually look at the video of her from 2002, 2001, it's like, she's a sick locomotive. She's in such bad shape. Her whistle, like, if you listen to the whistle on those clips, it's like, help me! Like, she's, like, pour steaming and everything. It's kind of similar to how Cotton Belt 819 operated for a while. Cotton Belt 819, granted, she was not as sickly throughout her life in the 80s and 90s as 2100. She was actually, mainly because that the Cotton Belt Railroad or St. Louis Southwestern Railroad was still around at that time. they would not be absorbed into the Union Pacific until 1926, which ironically I believe is right around the time that Cotton Belt 819 was retired, essentially. But they didn't really have a place to run them. But essentially, Cotton Belt 819 was always seen just shooting smoke, just like it was pouring smoke out the stack, which was, and usually that's a sign of bad firing, of like bad oil and whatnot. And it was just like those locomotives, like many of these oil burners, when you see them just pouring black smoke out, it's usually because they're over-firing the locomotive. But if you see the oil, like this thick black smoke, and the thick black smoke, and it's drifting off to the side, even when it's running at high speed, that's usually a sign the fuel oil that they have is not the greatest. And many of these locomotives that you would see, like old oil burners that you'd see in the late 90s, early 2000s, to some extent, like for example, 3985. 3985, even though she was in great shape throughout the 90s, by 2010, she was a tired locomotive. And 3985 actually had a legit tendency to have her smoke just drift off to the side. Now, granted, this is a Class 1 rail, that Union Pacific is a Class 1 railroad. They have the equipment like they basically have the funds to do all that. But for one reason or another, that particular locomotive was never really kept in good shape. I'm gonna start applying brakes as we approach the station here. Give it a little bit of pressure, probably a couple notches there. Coming up fast. Once we get to the signal, I'm gonna go start slamming on the brakes here. Give it a bit more pressure. There we go. Start ringing the bell. But yeah, from what I've heard about the operations of the 3985, it was kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, right, that's there's one particular story that I had heard about the 3985 where essentially to get the dynamo working, they rigged a hammer to whack the dynamo to get it to work, which was ridiculous. It's like one of those things, like, why are you hitting something? Like, it's one of those things, it's like that whole joke, like, if it ain't working, just smack it a few times, it'll work. But yeah, it was one of those situations where, the 3985, now, I'm honestly impressed that the group that's restoring it back to operation, they're actually taking the time and actually restoring her, along with the locomotive that also really hasn't, I was not expecting anyone to restore her. 5511, it's a 210-2 from the Union Pacific Railroad. It was one of the pieces that was donated to that very same group. I don't know the name of the group off the top of my head. I'll probably just mention it. I'll probably put the name of it on screen or something. But they're actually slowly piecing together. They're probably slowly restoring both locomotives, honestly. Alright, come on. Slow her down. We'll just stop here. We're supposed to arrive at 19, and we've made it on time. Alright, we made it on time. We'll just need to get ready with that. Go ahead and put some water in the boiler so we got... Okay, we set the reverser forward again. So yeah, it's one like the locomotive, like the railroad, like many of these locomotives being restored back to operation have either ran once in the preservation era in the 90s and early 2000s, or they basically have not seen the light of day since they were last steamed up during the steam era. Oh, we're good. Let's launch her. We're going. We're good. You're good. That's enough water in the water. Alright, now we're moving. We got our timeliness bonus this time around. So now our next stop is over here. Oh, there it is. Drop that reverser back a bit. So our next stop is the Union Station over there. About 22 miles. The reverser a bit further. Can't talk. Oh yeah, we should be good. Get some more fire. Shove some more fire in the firebox. Shove some more coal in there. About 42 miles an hour. We're gonna keep her going here. Well, that's a nice little brake stand, honestly. On about 48 or 46 rather, 46. So yeah, it's really cool to see a lot of these locomotives backing up, like restored and being restored and back in operation like they used to be. Now, I will say, it is kind of a, like, there was kind of a joke sent. There was a little joke made in the announcement video for the 3001's restoration. And it was, the line was, one cannot simply restore it and run it on the main, which has become kind of a meme within the rail preservation community. It was one of those things where, like, oh, let's just restore it and run it on the main. Like, that's literally kind of a meme within the community a bit. Because you got these foamers, which I've talked about this term a little bit with some friends, but I've never really kind of explained it properly. And I feel like there's a way to go about it. But foamers, to my knowledge, are people that quote-unquote foam, or like basically they're people that are excited about something so much that they will quote foam at the mouth when they see it. So a common example of this with the community to meme about it is Conrail, the Consolidated Rail Corporation. Conrail has become one of those foamer railroads, people call it, as some people call it in the community. And it's just one of those things where, like, it's like people like, oh, I see a Conrail unit, that's incredible. Like, no, it's just another railroad from the 90s, like 70s and 90s. Like, that's not all that special. Sometimes you get, like, I mean, another example is the Union Pacific 4014. People will foam like crazy. You get the foamers. From how I would describe them, are people that typically they're not. I don't count them as the same as what I would call rivet counters, or people that really want to make sure that the locomotive is up to spec. Like, they want it to be historic and whatnot. Rivet counters, I feel, are a little different. But there are people, and the foamers are kind of like, I guess you could say, like, another a particular, like, there's like three types of rail fans, I guess you could say. You've got the rivet counters, you've got the foamers, and then you've got the, I guess you could say, historians. And those are the ones on the extreme ends of the spectrum. Because the historians are kind of a combination of the foamers and the rivet counters. Because they typically are people that will know pretty much everything about a particular railroad, but in historically accurate detail, rather than just random little tidbits and whatnot here and there. The rivet counters are basically people that will tell you everything that is wrong with the locomotive to some extent. And they basically will say yeah, this part is wrong, this part is wrong, this part is wrong, you got this right, and so on and so forth. Foamers are like, oh my god, this locomotive is so cool. I've seen it, I've seen this so many times. I've seen this locomotive 50 times in one day. Those I would consider foamers. and granted, I'm going to put the definitions of each of these locomotive, like each of these kind of people on, like the Urban Dictionary definition, I guess you could say, of each one on the screen, because granted, they're all, like, aside from the historians, because historians actually typically are employed by, like, typically volunteers at museums and whatnot, so typically there's a reason why they're the historic, like I call them historians, because they're not actively, they're not purposely being jackasses or anything like that. They're doing it for a reason. They're doing it for a job. Yeah, for the most part, a piece of beef jerky stuck in my throat here. But it's one of those things where, like, at the end of the day, like, foamers and rivet counters, I feel, are kind of close to the same thing, just on either end of the spectrum, honestly. Kind of hard to explain. Well, really open her up to get up to see here. So we are going up grade. We're going about 1%. We're on a 1% grade here, so trying to keep it kind of steady here. But yeah, I've talked with a few people that are just like, there's like I've basically talked with a handful of each one of these groups on places like Discord or YouTube and whatnot, where they comment on videos and whatnot, or I talk with them on YouTube. And I wouldn't call myself either one of the three, honestly. I'm not really a historian. I'm kind of a foamer. I'm not much of a rivet counter. But I'm kind of in the middle. I'm kind of like the casual rail fan, which I guess you could say is more foamer-esque. But it's one of those things where it's like, you come across essentially as a it's just one of those things where, like, granted, I made this channel so much about trains over the years and whatnot, but yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, I have really yet to say that, not really, like, I don't see anything wrong with, like, kind of how I view things on, I really do think I'm casual, but it is still cool to hear, like, many of these locomotives, these smaller locomotives that are very famous and very, like, kind of documented as being, like, dream projects, if you will, being restored back to operation and whatnot. So it's really kind of cool to see a lot of just how the equipment has been just seeing all of this kind of being brought back, and especially a lot of the locomotives that had once run before, like in the 80s and 90s, and haven't run since. Like I said, like seeing number 1361 being restored back to operation, in the hopes of seeing it run on like as a beautifully restored locomotive, I mind you. It's just like one of those things where it's like, that's gonna be cool to see when it comes back alive. And 3001, another locomotive that I just absolutely I would love to see a New York Central locomotive be restored back to operation. There's no one can tell you otherwise. Like these are historic, like there are things like this is a once in a lifetime type thing. Like you're never gonna really see a locomotive, like seeing a New York Central locomotive back to life and operating for the first time in 67 years. They literally say it's been 67 years since 3001 has operated. Like she's turned a wheel, and it's really cool. I'll link the website down below so you can so you can get actually donate and see this project through because these guys are really. In the words of Heist, these guys have gotten a t-shirt, been there, done that type thing. It's not like they don't know what they're doing. The Fort Wayne Historical Society, Railroad Historical Society, is a group that knows what they are getting into. They know this is going to be a huge project. They know it's going to be a task that is going to push their resources to the limit. And it's really good, and it's really nice that they are going all out with this. They're not going half-ass. They're not going to half-ass this project, not by a long shot. And granted, there are outfits out there that half-ass their projects. There's no doubt about it. Like, and not to put them on blast, but the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad, when they announced that they were going to be restoring 1309 back to operation, there was that initial, oh my god, they're actually going to restore an articulating locomotive to run on their little scenic railroad? Do they have the space for it? Do they have the, do they have the room? Do they have the ability to turn it? Turns out, no. When they announced that project back in I think it was 2015 or so, it was like shortly after the Big Boy was announced or something, that the whole line had to be rebuilt from the ground up. Essentially, to this day, that locomotive is in such bad shape. She's actually out of service for the year this year, mainly because I think she blew a cylinder or something like that earlier in the year. Like, there was something majorly wrong with her this year that led to her being sidelined for the rest of the year. And it was just like, what? Why did you decide to restore a locomotive this big when you had a part? Like, granted, 734, from what I've heard, she was beat to hell by 2015. She was beat to hell, and I'm amazed that she was allowed to run that last year, because technically her boiler was in such bad shape that there was she was leaking like a sieve. It's one of those things where she was leaking. She was like oh shit, this is gonna be yeah, we're slow. Okay, there we go. She was one of those locomotives. She's rough around. She's rough around the edges. She was not in great shape, but she was kind of an icon of the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad. She was one of those locomotives that everyone knew what she sounded like, what she was like. I mean, she was called the Thunder. She was one of the loudest locomotives in the region. But that was basically because they basically worked her to death, which is why they decided to go with 1309 as the new steam locomotive for that railroad, because they were just working the small 280 to death. And unfortunately, they're doing the same thing with 1309. They're pushing that thing to its limit, and they don't really have the resources to keep it running. Now, granted, it's not like they're a bad group. It's just that the original management that decided to restore 1309, from what I've heard, didn't know what the hell they were doing. And like I said, I could be talking out my ass, honestly. But it was just one of those things where oh, yeah, you guys were doing this and didn't have any clue what you were getting into. So, yeah, it was just one of those things where it's oh, you guys just wanted to restore this locomotive because it was big choo-choo. Big choo-choo, big fancy, big wow. Big choo-choo, big wow. There you go. And, yeah, it's just, I'm amazed that locomotive, when they, granted, they've since restored pretty much, they've gotten everything really ready to go for that locomotive to operate safely over the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad at speed, mind you, and at tonnage. But the interesting thing that I've noticed about what they've been doing with 1309, there's a particular trouble spot with that particular locomotive. They have to pull it back to Frostburg. They have to pull it back from Frostburg, back to Cumberland, Maryland, with a diesel. They can't turn it around. From what I've been told about why they do that is because there's a sharp curve that they're not comfortable with to get the locomotive on the turntable. She can fit on the turntable, just barely. She can barely fit on the turntable because it's supposedly from the loading, how big the locomotive is from the lead pilot truck to the last wheel on the tender. She is she's just about the same size as 734. But for one reason or another, there's a very sharp curve into the turntable at Frostburg, and they're not comfortable with operating it, like operating over the turntable. And I heard, and they, like, people say, like, and the next question is, like, why wouldn't they just loosen up the curve or replace the turntable, move the turntable a little bit? Well, it's because there's an ice cream shop that the owner won't let them really do much work on. That would block the road. There's a bunch of excuses for that. But it's also one of those things where it's like, it's not hurting anyone to pull the locomotive back tender first. Like, it's not that big of a deal. So it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, yeah, you're good. Like, if they're not worried about just how the locomotive's operating and whatnot, then by all means they're good. Like, if they're fine with running things tender first, then like, if they're fine with, like, having the locomotive being towed back by a diesel, that's fine. That's not a big deal. It just lets the locomotive be ran like a typical push-pull service. Or if they, like, and it's one of those things where it's like, it's still a big choo-choo. It's a big locomotive. There's nothing wrong with having a big giant steam locomotive operating over Western Maryland. It's more the issue of the amount of people that they're working with, like the resources and everything. You're obviously going to need a lot of resources to maintain a giant behemoth of a locomotive like that. There's no way in hell that you're gonna just half-ass it. And groups like the Fort Wayne Historical Society are proof positive of that. You're like, with Fort Wayne, they've proven that they can operate big motive power, big superpower locomotives safely and for long stretches of time. I mean, keep in mind that 765 has been operating since 1979 officially. So to see that they're going to take another and granted, they've also restored 2716 before as well. In 1996, they actually for a time operated 2716 for a short time in 1996. The reason being is that they were in the process of restoring 765, and they figured, oh, this is going to take a little longer than normal. We'll just we'll restore this locomotive quickly and get it operational as well. Well, lo and behold, 2716 needed a lot more work than they originally thought, and now thankfully the Kentucky Steam Railroading Heritage, or whatever it's called, I don't know what it's called exactly, but they're actually going all out with the idea of restoring 2716 back to operation, which would mean we would have all three Berkshires that are in preservation, that have run since the 80s at least, back to operation. We'll see 2716. And Pierre Marquette 1225 and 765 have already returned to service, so they're already in great shape. So if you've ever wanted to see like one of these beautiful Berkshires return to service, well, you've got three examples of the Berk back in operation. So the idea, operating, and the Fort Wayne Historical Society, it's a big operation. It's much bigger than it was in '96 when they took on the project of 2716. It's just a massive. So they're not it's not like they're out of their comfort zone. They're not really out of their comfort zone. They know what they're doing. They have the resources and they have the support. Like, we have to keep in mind that not only is the Fort Wayne Historical Society got the backing here, but several major tourist railroads are basically like, yeah, we'll help you operate this locomotive. We'll help you. Like, there's several outfits that have basically said, yeah, we'll go ahead and help you out with it. Why not? So to see locomotives like 3001 being restored and put back into service as a beautiful piece of machinery. You have to keep in mind, these Mohawks, like I said, 3001 is a beautiful locomotive. I mean, her sister, 2933, not 16, that's a different locomotive. 2933 is here at my museum, is at the St. Louis Museum of Transportation. And she is a beautiful example of she's like if you say what you think of when you think of a steam locomotive, you either think of a locomotive like this, number 99999, or you think of the Mohawks, the 3001 or the 2933, because those are the locomotives that essentially they're the things that effectively they're the ones that effectively showed that this is kind of the pinnacle of steam. This is kind of how steam locomotives were seen. Like that's how the locomotives operated. Okay, we're coming up about 6 miles away from our from our stop, which is good. I'm kind of releasing the brakes here because we're running hard on the brakes here. So, whoops. There we go, right through. Thank you. But yeah, it's just at the end of the day, to see a lot of it, like we're in the, I want to say the third golden age of preservation, because we had that initial golden age in the 80s and 90s, and then we had that second golden age around 2010 or so, where you had these bigger like these smaller projects. Well, actually, I would say like 2015. Yeah, 2010 to 2015 I would say would be the second golden age. Because you had the 21st Century Steam Program that was restarted for Norfolk Southern. Basically the second chance for the Norfolk Southern Steam Program. And then you had projects like the 4014 announced in 2015. And then further out, like earlier than that, we had things like, I want to say the T1 project was announced right around that same time, was in the 2010s. That's a whole hell of a lot of stuff there. But it was one of the, it was like, these are, we're in the third golden age of rail preservation. And it's looking like we're going to see a lot more projects like much more well thought out projects over the next couple of decades. Because you have to keep in mind, like the Spirit of Altoona, number 1361. They're not half-assing that project either. It's one of those situations where they're literally taking it apart piece by piece, making sure it's everything. They're rebuilding the damn firebox and boiler. Like they're slowly rebuilding that whole locomotive because they want to meet the safety factor. They want to make sure that everything is to FRA standards. Hell, we're also seeing a homegrown project. Basically, a guy in his apartment building a steam locomotive from the ground up. Well, not yet, but he's going to. I mentioned the Denver and Rio Grande Western before, and they have a bunch of narrow gauge equipment that's still around and still operates. And there's a bunch of narrow gauge equipment that has survived over the years. But there's some locomotives that were never saved, but are crucial in telling the story of the narrow gauge life, of the way Colorado narrow gauge operates, the era of Colorado narrow gauge. That locomotive is a small 240, the Montezuma. The locomotive was built in 1871, was scrapped, it was basically pulled from service pretty quickly on the Denver and Rio Grande Western because they just didn't have the motor, it wasn't powerful enough for them. And all of basically that locomotive and her sisters were all scrapped. But she's small enough where she can be rebuilt from the ground up. And lo and behold, there is a YouTuber, mind you, that's another thing that's kind of funny about this. There's a YouTuber, Heiss, and I've linked his channel before, and I'll link it again. And he is going through the process of restoring, or rather, rebuilding the Montezuma from the ground up. He will be that's kind of that's really cool to me. That he's going to take the time to rebuild to modern standards. Well, I say modern, but it's gonna be more of a historical. Like they're kind of mixing modern and historical stuff and whatnot. And that's kind of that from what I understand. They're gonna try and make it look historical. They're gonna go as historically accurate as possible, but at the same time, it's one of those things where it's like they're going to what's the word? It's like they're going to restore, like, basically it's just, yeah, they're gonna be rebuilding this locomotive like to modern safety standards, but keep it like as historically accurate as possible to its operational days in the 1870s and whatnot. To put this into perspective, the oldest Denver Rio Grande Western locomotive that we have currently, that's going to operate. I can't say technically operates because it's not in operational service right now. Is locomotive number 346. Denver and Rio Grande Western number 346 was built in 1881, I believe, or something like that. I would have to ask about that particularly. But she was one of those. She is an extremely old locomotive, and she technically is operational. She's currently over at the Durango and Silverton Railroad getting some work done to be restored back to operation, and she'll operate over the the Colorado Railroad Museum later in the year. So it's one of those things where it's like she is literally like the oldest Denver and Rio Grande Western locomotive we have in the modern era. But she won't be for very long. Basically the locomotive that she replaced, the Montezuma, number 1, she'll be restored she'll be built from the ground up. And because she's so small, Heiss has joked about this, how he could basically put it on a low bed trailer without the smoke box and get through most McDonald's drive-thrus. I want to put the clip here because it's just so hilarious. Because it's just like, really, you could do that? And considering that there's been people have put locomotives on flatbed trailers that are under steam, that would be so hilarious to have that locomotive under steam on a flatbed trailer and going through a McDonald's drive-thru ding 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 ding. It's just what in the world is this? Now, granted, I'm sure one of the and granted that they've said that they're probably gonna have to make a few concessions to meet modern safety standards. But they're gonna try and keep it as original as possible, and that's the real big thing there. That's the really when I mentioned that there are the second group is historians. That other group of rail fans are the historians. I would consider Heiss a historian, not a foamer. He often jokes that he's more of a foamer than anything. And I wouldn't say that. Because he's one of those guys that literally takes the time to tell you the history of a locomotive, to tell you the history of why this is important to preservation, and why this is a big deal. We're coming up to the station here. There we go. Stop. Made it on schedule too. What? Oh, is that not the station platform? I did it again. Really? It's less than a mile. It's about a mile away. I stopped at the wrong station platform. Fuck! Get moving. Well, anyway, back to my original point. Before I kind of stop here abruptly. To see groups like the Fort Wayne Historical Society and the and homegrown groups like Heiss and his little team of, I wouldn't even call them foamers really. They're kind of, oh god, what would they be called, honestly, in my opinion? Heiss is a historian. He's a historian. He's no doubt in my mind of he's considered more of a historian type than anybody. But to see these little groups pop up and build and restore things or build things from the ground up and get them back to operation, like, that's a big deal. That to me is a big deal. We're not going to have much in the way of the opportunity of seeing a homegrown, a YouTuber, for God's sakes, a YouTuber. That's the big thing I want to stress. A YouTuber like Heist is going through the process of building a narrow gauge steam locomotive from 1871 back to operation, back to service, because it's part of history. And granted, he's not talked to, like, now granted, I'm sure the management of the Colorado Railroad Museum would not be against the idea of having the Montezuma return. There's more than enough people out there, I feel, that'd be more, like, there's more than enough groups out there that would love to see that locomotive pop up into some sort of service or operate over narrow gauge trackage. Now granted, there's not very much in the way of narrow gauge trackage of the Denver and Grand and Western. But one of the territories, like, she would have, like, even though all the territory that she used to run on are gone in terms of narrow gauge equipment, if she had, like, if they do it right, they can actually operate that locomotive over a territory like the Cumbres and Toltec, or the Durango and Silverton, where she'll be in great, like, she'll be, like, again, she's gonna be in good hands. She's gonna be in great hands. She's gonna be in great service. There are gonna be teams out there that are gonna love, like, there are gonna be plenty of people out there that are gonna love to see that locomotive in operation. All right, here we go. We stopped short at the station, but it's fine. We didn't do anything bad, so we're good. Got to ring the bell. There we go. Drop it off. But yeah, with that said, I'm unloading the passenger here, or loading more passengers, but yeah. So with that said, like and comment down below, subscribe if you guys want more, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.